I know it's supposed to be just kind of a funny statement, but knowing what you did wrong and not doing it again is the essence of success long-term, right? Is that people often say you don't learn as much from success as you do from failure. Well, but you got to learn it. You got to learn, okay, I'm not doing that again. Is that the assignments that we have through this class is that, you know, especially here for this class, because you don't have to study for the exam and come in with a whole bunch of new stuff in your head. You need to be able to come up with a successful approach, time management, analysis of the questions, figuring out what's what, making sure you get the answers down completely. You know, all stuff that you can do differently if you didn't do it well on the last time. Same thing with the papers. Just look through, gee, I didn't do the format of the references last time right. Maybe I'll do that right this time. Maybe I'll do the footnotes right this time. We're gonna do the skin. Now, we will eventually talk about the different senses that the skin carries, because there's a lot of different senses there. But this was the only good overhead I had that showed the structure, where you've got an epithelial surface produced by this layer underneath. You've got connective tissue, fat underneath that. I'm probably not pointing at it right. Epithelium, dead cells coming off the top. This production layer that goes down around the hair follicle and helps produce the hairs from the base. Lots of different types of nerves, but connective tissue here, fat, nerve trunks coming in, and hair itself going up with the imprint of the cells that made it on the hair. So, I'm not going to list this, but you are. One of the main purposes of the skin is it is a water barrier. Why? We're not in the water much. No, it's to keep water in. Is that one of the old Star Treks, The Next Generations, is that they were dealing with these aliens that were built very differently from us. And they found that when they addressed us, the universal translator said they were saying, you know, hello, ugly bags of mostly water. Because that's what they saw us as. And that's what we are. We are big bags of water, and it would be nice if the water mostly stayed inside, right? We lose it when we breathe, we lose it when we pee, and we do lose some of it through our skin. Is that our ancestors were in a semi-dry environment, but also humid environment, but water not quite as much a premium as it is in some parts of the world. Obviously, it's a protective barrier. For all the times that whenever epithelium shows up in a tissue, people want to go, it's protection. Well, it's protection. It is varies in thickness, depending on how much protection is needed. If you do a lot of stuff with your hands, then you produce a layer of dead and dying cells that is many, many, many cells thicker than places where there's not a lot of abrasion. If you walk barefoot all the time, you may wind up with as many as 80 layers of skin between the production layer and the surface where they're wearing off, because they do wear off. Whereas here, there's just a handful of layers, because not much going on there. Obviously, this is a way in. Any kind of break in this barrier is a way in for potential pathogens. So there's a lot of immunological protection, a lot of histamine-producing cells embedded in just underneath your skin, what they call mast cells. Our temperature. Enzymes run all of our chemistry, and enzymes, every enzyme has a temperature at which it works the best. Sometimes it's a fairly broad range, sometimes it's a pretty tight range. We have enzymes that have settled into a tight range, and that's because we can hold our temperature stable all the time. But to do that, our interaction with the colder, warmer environment has to be able to do that. So temperature control is a big deal with your skin. We can flush, open up blood vessels and lose more heat. We can sweat onto the surface and shoot water molecules off into space. Fast molecules or hot molecules, it takes the heat with them. We're not, I mean, we're basically tropical animals. Our ancestors were, more or less equatorial, so dealing with the cold was something they needed artificial help with. So we do that with covering and with building buildings around us. But we, have some ability to resist the cold as well. Incidentally, goosebumps actually are a holdover from when our ancestors were considerably hairier than we are, or even a lot of our ancestors are now. And your hair follicles, I don't know if it shows on this. No, it doesn't show on the overhead. Your hair follicles are tilted. And there's a little string of smooth muscle that attaches to them that can pull them upright. And when it does that, it produces a bump on the surface of the skin. Well, when you're particularly hairy, that fluffs your hair out, which produces more air pockets, which are insulation. So when you're cold, you can fluff your hair out. It increases the same way styrofoam is insulation, got a lot of little air pockets in it. But also, a lot of animals will fluff their hair out. If you bug a cat, you'll see it do that, to make themselves look bigger and maybe more scary to something that potentially is an enemy. But of course, it doesn't do us any good. It's a holdover from an ancient need, and so we get scared, or we get cold, we get goosebumps. It isn't really doing anything useful. And of course, your skin is also sensory, that overhead on all the different types of senses that are in the skin. Your epidermis, the top layer, is just a layer of skin, of flat cells, all kind of zipped together pretty effectively, that are being produced from underneath and pushed to the surface and then wearing off. Your dermis is the layer just underneath that is the support layer for your skin. That's where your connective tissue is that holds the skin down. That's where your nerves actually are, although some of the nerves terminate up in the epidermis. They'll have little fingers that go up in there. Your blood vessels run, under your epidermis through your dermis. Lots of other stuff, bits and pieces are in your dermis. We, as vertebrates, as backboned animals, have this two-layer skin. Other animals just have an epidermis. They don't have two layers to it, or other, non-backboned animals. You also, at the base of your epidermis and interacting with your dermis to some extent, are producing cells with pigment in them, melanin, a brown pigment. There's two things going on in your skin that have to do with the color of your skin. One of them is your layer at the bottom is a whole bunch of cells that are always dividing. And cells that are always dividing are very prone to dividing badly and becoming cancerous. And there's a bunch of things that can make them do that, including ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet radiation can break DNA and cause cancerous changes in cells. Melanin is a UV blocker. So the browner your skin, the less UV light gets down to the bottom layers where the cells are being made and where they can potentially turn cancerous. So people who are ancestrally dark-skinned, their ancestors came from someplace with a lot of sun exposure. So our distant ancestors, our original ancestors who lived in the open grasslands of Africa would have been very, very dark-skinned. And other places, people who live currently there, people who live on the open plains of Australia, people who lived on the open plains of North America, particularly dark-skinned. Get into much more forested areas or get away from the equator where the sun's not overhead, it's at an angle so you don't get as much exposure. And you see populations of lighter skinned people. To which you may go, okay, well, I understand why they don't necessarily need as much protection from skin cancer, but why would their skin particularly go light? Something else is going on down in the dermis. There are cells down there that react to light radiation, actually ultraviolet radiation. So some of it's got to get down there. And they produce vitamin D, which is a very important calcium control molecule. So you need a certain amount of the light to get to the base of your skin, but not enough to cause it cancerous. So my ancestors, who are from the forested areas of Europe, away from the equator and under the canopy, light skin. On the equator in South America, in the rainforests, those natives are light skinned. So light skinned people, less sun exposure. You know, our base ancestral color is very, very dark. And we've just evolved that balance of, we don't need the protection, but we need the vitamin D for that. One thing I do want to talk about, this is where ink goes for tattoos, because you can't put it here, it would just wear away. Henna tattoos just color the epidermis and they wear away. Tattoos, technically illegal. It's injected. Is that, in theory, things that are injected need to go through all sorts of regulatory barriers. But when they set those regulatory barriers up, somebody must have said, well, you know, they're injecting the ink under the skin for tattoos. Are we gonna do anything about that? But it was like sailors and, you know, Marines, and the tattoos were pretty simple, dark patterns. And in some cultures, the tattooing had been done for, you know, forever. And so the regulatory bodies went, oh, we'll just ignore that. Yeah, it's technically illegal, but we won't worry about that. Here's the issue with tattoos. Tattoos have become hugely popular in the last 20 years. And as tattoos have gotten more popular, people want more from their tattoos. You know, I want this picture, I want that picture, I want the, you know, I need bright red, I want it to glow in the dark, I want it, you know, to be shiny. And here's the problem with tattoos, since they were never really pulled into a regulatory environment, the only real regulations have popped up to protect people from contamination being injected under their skin. That was during the HIV outbreaks, where people were actually getting HIV from dirty tattooing needles. They were tattooing people with HIV, picking the HIV up on the needles, not cleaning them, or putting them into the ink and then contaminating the ink. So they built regulations about that. There are virtually no regulations about the ink itself. Where's it come from? Who the hell knows? Who put it together? Somebody in their garage, possibly. Possibly somebody in the upper hills of China somewhere. What chemicals did they use? Who knows? Are the chemicals toxic? Do they, you know, do they liberate and eventually become part of your system and potentially poison you? Who knows? Do they flake off and get into your fluid drainage system and screw up your fluid drainage system for the area where your tattoo is? Yes, they do, some of them. So this generation and the generation before it is a huge experimental, uncontrolled test for how bad are these things going to be. And we may find that when the current generation gets 20, 30 years down the road, and we're trying to figure out what these weird illnesses they have are, we may look back and go, maybe we shouldn't have been putting that green pigment under people's skin. Maybe that blue turns out to be an issue. So if you're thinking about getting a tattoo, I don't know, I've always thought about having a tattoo like having your high school haircut for your entire life and not really being able to do anything about it. There's a huge industry in removing tattoos, which Basically, you need a laser tuned to a certain color frequency to vaporize the color under your skin. Literally heats it up, vaporizes it, and you can't remove all the colors because there aren't necessarily lasers to do that. If you have white in a tattoo, it reflects pretty much all the colors. You might be able to burn it off with an infrared or an ultraviolet laser, but you're literally burning it out from under your skin. Anyway, that is skin. Now we're going to move into the very last of the systems, the nervous system.